Welcome back to Fun's Clip Channel, where you'll exciting movie plots full of action and suspense. Get ready with your coffee, cigarettes, and cassava chips. This time we'll tell the story of a former elite soldier now living as a hired driver. The rules are simple. No names, no questions. Just deliver the package on time. But everything changes when the package he's carrying isn't just an item but a woman. From here on out, his life is never the same, and he must fight against a dangerous conspiracy to survive. And this is the transporter. The story focuses on a taxi driver named Frank Martin, who works as a courier. He is seen picking up several clients who have booked his services. But it turns out that Frank is picking up a group of criminals who have just robbed a bank. When the robbers get into the car, it turns out that there are not as many of them as agreed with Frank. Frank then demands that one of them get out. Otherwise, Frank will not move the car an inch.
That we make exposes us. Every exposure increases the risk of getting caught.
Frank has thought this through carefully because he knows the limitations of the car he always uses, including the distance it can travel, the load it can carry, and the terrain they will be traveling on. Frank also explained to the leader of the robbers that if they did not remove one of them, everyone in the car would be caught.
It exposes us. Every exposure increases the risk of getting caught.
They threatened to kill Frank, but Frank calmly said that his car had sophisticated technology and a code that only he knew, which meant that if Frank died, none of them would be able to use the car.
Not without the ignition code, you won't.
After hearing Frank's reasonable explanation, the leader killed one of them, and Frank immediately departed as police cars arrived, making the chase inevitable. Upon arriving at the agreed location, the leader of the robbers paid them a little extra for saving them all. He also asked Frank to take them to their actual destination, but Frank had to refuse because it was not part of the agreement. He also took a tip from the criminals and only took the amount of money he was supposed to. The next morning, Frank was visited by an inspector named Tarconi, where he began to interrogate Tarconi about the robbery that had occurred the previous day. However, due to Frank's strong arguments, Tarconi had to leave without getting any information from him.
Door's always open to you.
After his return, Frank received a call asking him to deliver an item. Long story short, Frank met with the person who had called him a while ago, and the client gave him the specifications of the item to be delivered by Frank. Frank also explained several rules to the client regarding his work, and after reaching an agreement, Frank finally decided to leave. The next day, Frank went to the place they had agreed upon to pick up the package and deliver it. After putting the package in the car, Frank immediately left so that his work would be finished quickly. At first, Frank's trip was quite enjoyable without any obstacles, but everything changed when his car tire went flat. When he went to get a spare tire from the trunk, he accidentally saw a moving package, which made Frank quite curious. Long story short, after changing the tire, Frank continued his trip to a restaurant, and after finishing his meal, Frank then bought a bottle of drink. As he continued his journey, he stopped again at a place and opened the package, which meant he had broken his own rule.
Hi.
It turned out that the woman was a very beautiful Asian woman named Lei. Frank gave her a drink so that the beautiful Lei would not be too thirsty. After giving her a drink, Frank continued his delayed journey. But once again, he was interrupted by Lei when she started fussing because she needed to urinate. Frank then tied Lei with a rope so she could urinate comfortably, and Frank wouldn't lose her. However, when the time for urinating was over, Lei didn't come back, which made Frank quite angry. It turned out that Lei had escaped and entered the forest. Despite that, Frank was able to find Lei easily without any difficulty. However, another problem arose when there were already 2 police officers waiting for them up there. It didn't take long for Frank to take care of the police officers. Long story short, Frank finally arrived at his destination, where he was greeted by a boss named Wall Street. After receiving his payment, he decided to leave immediately, but before he left, Wall Street asked Frank to send another package to a certain place. Without thinking twice, Frank agreed and left for the place Wall Street had instructed him to go to. While eating, Frank seemed to be thinking about something. Then, after finishing his meal, Frank hurried back to his car. However, before getting into the car, Frank was suddenly tempted by a can of soda and immediately bought it. After buying the drink, someone suddenly tried to kill him. Feeling that he hadn't gone far, Frank returned to the place where he had delivered the package and immediately ransacked the place, defeating dozens of guards there. However, since he couldn't find Wall Street, he decided to leave the area with one of their cars. But it turned out that Lei was secretly inside the car when the guards were confronting Frank. After leaving him out of frustration, Frank decided to take him home. Upon arriving there, Frank immediately released Lei and gave him food. He also told Lei to go to bed early so that his brain could relax and be ready for the next day. The next day, Wall Street went to the hospital to visit his subordinate, who had been beaten up by a courier. Unable to accept this reality, Wall Street decided to kill his subordinate there. Back to Frank and Lei, they were again visited by Inspector Tacconi, whose purpose was, of course, to interrogate Frank about his car, which had been smashed to pieces. After seeing a woman there, Tacconi was quite confused.
Thank you.
The inspector asked them both about the car, but Frank only replied that his car had been stolen and that he knew nothing else. Meanwhile, his encounter with Lei occurred when he was walking alone after his car was stolen, and luckily he met Lei on the street, who was willing to take him home. Hearing this from the two of them was enough to confuse the inspector. He then asked them both to come to his office that afternoon.
Would you mind walking me?
After finishing with the inspector, Frank felt that the atmosphere in his house was too quiet, so he said to Lei that his house had never been this quiet until suddenly someone attacked it. It turned out that the attack was carried out by Wall Street in revenge, with hundreds of shots fired, plus several attacks that hit Frank's house. Fortunately, God gave them both the chance to live, so they were able to survive the attack by getting into the water. The two of them dived to the bottom of the open sea until they reached a house that was Frank's second home, which of course no one knew about. There, Frank continued to regret his fatal mistake of opening the package that was his biggest taboo as a courier. Tired of Frank's complaints, Lei immediately teased him to calm him down.
Very single.
To make a long story short, after the censored scene was over, they both went to see the inspector to give their statement. The inspector then asked Frank about his destroyed house, but again, Frank evaded the question, saying that he and Lei were swimming in a romantic place, and when they returned, his house was in a terrible condition.
Who wants witnesses?
Frank's simple explanation only confused the inspector even more. In the midst of the confusion, one of his subordinates suddenly asked the inspector to meet someone outside. Then, after the inspector left, Lei quickly sabotaged the inspector's computer and searched for data on someone related to the attack that morning. It didn't take long for Lei to easily find the person who had attacked him, and that person was Wall Street. Shortly thereafter, the inspector returned, but luckily Lei had already finished his business. Since there was nothing else to discuss, the two of them excused themselves from the inspector, and the inspector himself gave them a little money because he was afraid they would starve. Then, after parting ways with Inspector Lei, he immediately invited Frank to go beat up Wall Street. However, since Frank was not a vengeful person, he chose to start everything from scratch.
But he blew up your car.
I'll buy a new one.
Using his tearful sadness tactic, Lay once again persuaded Frank by saying that there were 400 people inside a container, including his entire family, and that the only person who knew the location of the container was that person himself. After hearing this heartbreaking news, Frank gradually softened and immediately went to the company run by Wall Street. Meanwhile, Wall Street, who had just arrived in his office, was immediately apprehended by Frank and Lay, who immediately asked him about the whereabouts of the container filled with humans that they were going to sell. However, when they didn't get an answer, Lay pointed a gun at Wall Street and threatened to kill him. But shortly after, his father arrived, who turned out to be the mastermind behind all the human trafficking. Meanwhile, Frank was immediately attacked by Wall Street and knocked unconscious. But before losing consciousness, Wall Street said that there weren't 400 people in the container, but 395 people who were still alive there.
395 made it here alive.
Then Inspector Tarconi arrived at Wall Street's house and was shocked to find someone he knew unconscious. Without hesitation, he took him to the police station to be detained. Tarconi was forced to do this because Wall Street said that Frank had taken advantage of the daughter of a director and threatened her. Because of this, the inspector had no choice but to arrest him. Long story short, upon arriving at the prison, Inspector Tarconi asked Frank several questions about what had happened to him. Frank then said that there were 400 lives in danger. He asked Tarconi to resolve the issue in order to save the lives of those 400 people, rather than wait for the police to take action that would violate their rules. He also promised to resolve the issue in less than 12 hours.
It doesn't take 12 months to get the job done.
Oh, yes, I know.
Hearing this, Tarconi immediately agreed, so he suggested that Frank make her Sandra so they could get out of there. Then their plan began, and eventually the two of them managed to get out of there. Finally, Frank arrived at a pier with a small boat. He decided to save Lay and the 400 people on his own, while Inspector Tarconi was asked by Frank to go home immediately because he didn't like working in a group. To make a long story short, Frank arrived at a dock filled with hundreds of containers of various contents. Because there were so many containers, Frank used a stethoscope to listen to the sounds of life inside them. Meanwhile, Lay was seen being taken by his father to a certain place because he was too upset with Lay regarding his rebellious attitude or nature. Back to Frank, who was seen to have been discovered by the enemy, forcing Frank to face them all. Frank cannot avoid a tense fight and chase, causing him to lose his clothes and the person he was chasing. Even though Lay and several container trucks leave them behind, Frank's fight continues with great tension. Long story short, morning arrives and Frank begins his action that morning by stealing a car to catch up and save Lay. However, due to the poor condition of the car, it eventually broke down, preventing Frank from continuing his mission. Suddenly, he spotted a private plane belonging to someone about to land. Seeing this, Frank took the initiative to chase after it. Crossing mountains, seas, and valleys, finally, Frank managed to reach the landing site. Then he asked the owner of the plane to take him there.
I'm not a tourist.
Long story short, after a little negotiation, the owner of the plane finally agreed to take him. Then, when he felt close enough to his target, Frank immediately jumped and landed on one of the container trucks he was targeting, and the fight continued. After a long and exhausting fight, Frank finally managed to get one of the containers, but when he was about to get down, suddenly a gun was pointed right at his head, and the person pointing it at him was the father of the person he wanted to save. Then he asked Frank to walk towards the cliff and jump there. Suddenly, Lay had managed to kill his father before his father could kill Frank. Shortly after, the inspector arrived with several officers. They immediately opened the container, which was filled with hundreds of Asian people who were about to be sold by his father. And that's the plot of this movie. If you like this video, don't forget to support this channel with likes, comments, and subscriptions. See you in the next movie review.